So here we are at the 12th Sunday of Ordinary Time. It's row, row, row your boat time. And we're rowing from fear to awe. So let me tell you a story. During a thunderstorm, a high school teacher was going on with class when suddenly there came a huge, a clap of thunder so loud that everyone jumped in their seats. And adopting a British accent, the teacher said, Now, little ones, not to worry, I'm here. And someone replied, That's why we're worried. Now, the apostles might have felt the same way when Jesus was sleeping and seemed to be oblivious to the storm that was all around them. So let me ask you, can you admit, do you ever feel that God is sleeping? Unaware of your danger, your problem, your difficulty? Do you ever feel that God is indifferent to your situation? Too busy with bigger global things that are going on, global problems? What situations have you faced that seemed insurmountable, ugly, or, and then they turned out to be okay? Did you feel that God was behind that outcome? Allstate asked years ago, Are you in good hands? Do you find that your life is in good hands with God? Isaiah 49:16 says, I have engraved you in the palm of my hand. And if that's true, why do so many lives turn out so tragically? What is a childhood fear that you can look back on now and say, I can't believe I was afraid of that? Maybe you secretly feared snakes and spiders, or even the amusement park, the roller coasters. We grow from these childhood fears step by step through baby steps. We learn to trust others who tell us how to act. They have our best interest in heart and will be with us as we go through our fears. And the faith journey with Jesus is similar. The first step of fear is usually not complete competence and confidence in Jesus. Is it usually a sense of awe and wonder? Amid a crisis, we can even see who Jesus is, and our first response is, wow. And in the gospel text, the disciples are in a similar boat. They're on a journey with Jesus, the rabbi, without complete faith in him as Lord. You might be able to diagnose their condition. They still see him as teacher, but have not yet summoned the courage to believe and become his real followers. They have watched him perform miracles and have not surrendered complete trust. They have listened to his teachings and they have learned the wisdom of the cross and the resurrection. They are faithless rather than faithful. They worry. Psychiatrist Edward Hallowell said, Toxic worry is a disease of the imagination. It is insidious and invisible, just like a virus. It swarms upon us unwanted, settling its way into our consciousness until it dominates our life. As worry infiltrates our minds, it diminishes our ability to enjoy our families, our friends, because we live in fear of what might go wrong. It undermines our ability to work, to love, and to play. Fear also cripples our ability to become transformed, which is the whole purpose of the gospel and why Jesus came into the world in the first place. Jesus is adamant. We cannot move forward in faith until we have learned how to deal with our fear. When Mark describes that violent squall and the great windstorm that came about, it sounds like the fears we encounter every day. The waves breaking over our boat in our lives today are technology issues, job pressures, money matters, health matters, loneliness, and some matters of media, We have problem with media overload that leads to, sleep deprivation. And then we have our deep fears. Am I enough? Can I survive all that scares me? Their conditions are sustained for people beginning the discipleship journey, and even veteran disciples, they needed a pep talk. Imagine that if these are Jesus's deepest companions, closest companions, they have their fears, they have their doubts. We can only expect the same thing to happen to us. A symptom of this condition is a panicked prayer, for help and rescue. Think about the last crisis you experienced. Did you pray to God to get a good grade maybe on the SAT, a promotion at work, a good result from the doctor's office? There's nothing wrong with asking God for these things. We want and need Jesus to take care of us immediately. And Paul acknowledged this point in his letter to the Corinthians. At one time, everyone talks to Jesus from a very human point of view. And the psalmist sings a similar tune in the storm as when we see people that are threatened. The ships were threatened. Some went on the seas and sea ships and merchants of the mighty waters. They saw the works of the Lord, his wonderful deeds in the deep. And for he spoke and stirred up the tempest of those high waves. And they cried out to the Lord in trouble, and he brought them out of their distress. He stilled the storm to a whisper, and the waves of the sea were just hushed. And the problem arises when we treat Jesus as a divine rescuer. Crisis-centered prayer alone leaves us faithless. The word for fear or fright in this story in Mark's is from the Greek word lacking of confidence and certainty. The despair of the disciples, they're cowards. They run away from faith responsibility, just demanding God to provide answers to the questions rather than summoning the courage to see who Jesus is. The good news is that Jesus remains with the disciples on the journey, inviting them to move forward from being cowards into seeing a revelation. He wants to show them what merchants saw at the seas. The Lord who calmed the storm is also the God who created the waters in the first place. To do so, they crossed to the other sea of the Sea of Galilee, right into the heart of a storm. And Jesus isn't staging a rescue mission by any means. Ironically, they have already been saved. Their hero falls to sleep in the storm. This miracle is a revelation of divinity to cowardly travelers. They awaken him, panicked, and start the journey's first step out of faithlessness. They ask him a question. Ask a question. They sound like the panicked student talking to the teacher after failing the exam. Do you not care that we are perishing? Jesus' response to their question is very important for us to look at. He doesn't scold. He doesn't dismiss their concerns, their terror. Instead, Jesus demonstrates both his intense, his love for them and his awesome power over the fears by simply speaking 3 words: peace, be still. Jesus is trying to communicate to them the importance of trust. He is asking for the choice of faith over fear. He is asking us to bring our fears to him. And still unbeknownst to them, they were summoning the God, the Son of God, out of the whirlwind. And then arising from his Sabbath rest, Jesus answers them by calming them and the storm. His response to their question with more questions, He doesn't answer their questions with trite answers. He invites further dialogue, further conversation. Jesus diagnoses their condition in the question, why are you so frightened? Are you still without faith? He names the problem as faithlessness, the root of their cowardice. In the Old Testament, another famous character experiences this kind of response from God. When Job requires God and begs him to appear, God doesn't answer his interrogations. He responds to Job with more questions. Who shut up the sea doors behind when it burst forth from the womb? When I made the clouds, its garment wrapped in thickness. When I established bounds for it and set its barred doors in place. When I said, this far, may you come no further? Here is where the proud waves must halt. And he said to them, in the second step of the journey, we ask Jesus questions, and he meets us in the storm and demonstrates his authority over the temporary storms that induce panic. But it's not all. He raises more questions about our lives, and through prayer and discernment, he dialogues with us. We realize and confess our faithlessness. And their response is this fourth step in the faith journey. They discover a sense of awe and wonder. Mark writes, they were filled with awe and said to one another, who can this be? Even the wind and the sea obey him. Where do you find yourself on this journey today? It might be easy to criticize, rescue mission prayers. And that's precisely where Jesus meets us. He wants to infuse our desperation with his patience, promises, and confidence, and to ask us a few questions. We learn to trust in a God who comes to us, not to give us the answers on the test, but only or the easy solution to a problem in our presence. That may be where you find yourself today, a crisis in who knows where, a business, family, church. You have cried out to God and asked God for the answers, and they just don't come. I have good news for you. Jesus is with you in the boat, but he doesn't want to solve the problem. He wants to go through the problem with you. He wants to rest beside you like a loving parent, comforting the child in a storm. The same God is present with you on the journey. He comes today, and after you cry out to him, your first response will be, wow, peace be still. And the church said, amen.